The first shimmer appeared at 03 for 7 hours, Greenwich Mean Time, on a Tuesday that would later be remembered as the day humanity's arrogance collided with the universe's most sacred tradition. Commander Jaden Briggs was nursing his third cup of coffee in the control tower of the Mojave Desert Military Training Facility when the radar technician, Corporal Elena Rodriguez, called out the anomaly. "Sir, we've got multiple contacts approaching from bearing to 70. Altitude 40,000 and climbing. They're not responding to radio hail, and their flight pattern doesn't match any known aircraft." Briggs set down his coffee and walked over to Rodriguez's station, his weathered face reflecting the green glow of the radar screen. At 52, he'd seen enough unexplained blips to know the difference between equipment malfunction and genuine mystery. These contacts were different. They moved with a fluid grace that defied conventional aerodynamics, their formations shifting like schools of fish in an ocean of sky. "How many are we tracking?" Briggs asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his veins. "Initial count shows 17 primary contacts, sir, but the number keeps fluctuating. They're either splitting apart or merging together in ways that shouldn't be possible." 300 miles above the Earth's surface, in the crystalline silence of space, the beings aboard the pilgrimage vessels were experiencing something entirely different. They called themselves the Ethereal Collective, though their true name existed in harmonics that human vocal cords could never reproduce. For 7,000 Earth years, they had been making this journey, a sacred migration that spanned galaxies and dimensions, seeking the wisdom that could only be found in the spaces between stars. Luminara was the guiding voice of this particular pilgrimage. Her consciousness stretched across multiple vessels like a conductor directing a cosmic symphony. In human terms, she might be considered their spiritual leader, though such rigid hierarchies were foreign to beings who existed as much in thought as in physical form. Her awareness touched each of the 6,000 pilgrims under her guidance, feeling their collective anticipation as they approached the next waypoint in their eternal journey. The waypoint was nothing special to look at, just a coordinate in space where the gravitational fields of several celestial bodies created a unique resonance. But to the Ethereal Collective, it was a sacred site, a place where the universe whispered its deepest secrets to those patient enough to listen. They had been planning this approach for 3 of their generations, calculating trajectories and meditation cycles to arrive at the precise moment when the cosmic harmony would be strongest. Luminara felt the shift in the universal music as they descended through Earth's atmosphere. The blue-green planet below them pulsed with a chaotic energy that both fascinated and concerned her. The inhabitants of this world, these humans, were young in the cosmic sense, their consciousness still trapped in the narrow bandwidth of physical existence. But there was something about their passionate intensity that intrigued the collective. Perhaps, Luminara thought, there might be wisdom to be gained from observing these energetic beings during their sacred pause. The pilgrimage vessels, each one a living extension of their pilot's consciousness, began their descent in perfect formation. To human eyes, they would appear as points of light, shifting and dancing in patterns that followed no earthly logic. But to the Ethereal Collective, this was prayer made manifest, devotion expressed through movement and harmony. Back in the Mojave Control Tower, the situation was escalating rapidly. General Patricia Hawthorne had arrived within minutes of the first sighting, her stern expression matching the severity of her silver-streaked hair, pulled back in a regulation bun. At 61, she had spent for decades in military service, and she had never encountered anything that couldn't be explained, contained, or neutralized through proper application of protocol and firepower. "What's our threat assessment, Commander?" she demanded, her eyes never leaving the radar display. "Unknown, General. They're maintaining altitude and speed, but their technology is clearly beyond anything in our databases. No heat signatures, no electromagnetic emissions that we can identify. It's like they're not entirely there. Everything's entirely somewhere, Commander. The question is whether they represent a threat to American airspace and American citizens." Rodriguez looked up from her console, her young face pale with the weight of what she was about to report. "General, we're picking up additional contacts. They're not just in our sector anymore. Similar formations are being reported over the Atlantic, the Pacific, and from our allies in Europe and Asia. This appears to be a global phenomenon." General Hawthorne's jaw tightened. In her experience, global phenomena that involved unidentified aircraft were either natural disasters or acts of war. Since weather services weren't reporting anything unusual, she was prepared to assume hostile intent until proven otherwise. "Scramble the F-35s, she ordered. "Full weapons load. Rules of engagement are yellow. But I want them ready to go hot if these contacts show any aggressive behavior, General." Briggs interjected carefully. "We should consider the possibility that these aren't military assets. Their behavior doesn't match any known attack pattern. Their behavior doesn't match anything known, period, Hawthorne replied. That makes them unpredictable, and unpredictable means dangerous. We'll establish contact through strength, then work on communication. 6 F-35 Lightning fighters roared into the dawn sky. Their pilots among the best America had to offer. Captain Marcus Chen led the formation, his steady hands on the controls and his mind racing through the briefing. He'd received just minutes earlier. Unidentified contacts, possible foreign technology, potential threat to national security. It was the kind of scenario they'd trained for countless times, but never expected to encounter in reality. Phoenix Flight, this is Tower. Rodriguez's voice crackled through Chen's headset. Be advised, contacts are maintaining position at Angels 40. No change in flight pattern, no response to radio contact on any frequency. Copy, Tower. Phoenix Flight has visual on the contacts. Chen squinted through his helmet visor, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The objects appeared to be translucent, almost ghost-like, shifting between visibility and transparency in a way that made his eyes water. Tower. These don't look like any aircraft I've ever seen. There. It's hard to describe. They look almost organic. Above them, Luminara felt the approach of the human vessels with a mixture of sadness and concern. The violent energy emanating from the military aircraft was like discordant notes in the cosmic symphony, their weapon systems charged with deadly intent. She reached out with her consciousness, trying to establish some form of communication, but found only closed minds locked behind barriers of fear and aggression. The humans' technology was crude but effective, she realized. Their aircraft were marvels of engineering within the limitations of their understanding. But they were designed with only one purpose, to dominate the sky through superior firepower. There was a tragic beauty in their single-minded efficiency. Like watching children play with dangerous toys they didn't fully comprehend. Peace be with you, young ones, Luminara whispered across the dimensional barriers, hoping that somewhere in their conscious minds, the human pilots might sense her benevolent intent. Captain Chen jerked in his cockpit as something touched the edge of his awareness. A presence that felt ancient and impossibly vast. For just a moment, he glimpsed something beyond the narrow focus of his mission. A sense of cosmic purpose that made his military objectives seem small and petty. But the sensation passed quickly, overwhelmed by years of training and the immediate demands of his situation. Phoenix 2, are you getting any readings on these things? He called to his wingman, Lieutenant Sarah Novak. Negative, Phoenix Lead. My targeting systems can't get a lock. It's like they're not entirely solid, but they're definitely there, and they're definitely not ours. In the control tower, the tension was reaching a breaking point. General Hawthorne watched the display as her fighters closed to intercept distance, while similar scenes played out at military installations around the globe. Every major power was scrambling aircraft, every defense network was at high alert, and still the mysterious contacts maintained their serene formations. Apparently oblivious to the growing threat they represented, General Rodriguez called out, her voice tight with stress. We're getting reports from civilian aircraft in the area. Multiple commercial pilots are reporting visual contact with the objects. They're describing them as beautiful, almost hypnotic. One pilot said it was like watching angels dance. Angels don't invade airspace without filing flight plans, Hawthorne replied grimly. What's the status on the intercept? Phoenix Flight is in position. Contacts are maintaining altitude and speed, still no response to radio hail. Tell Captain Chen to make a close pass. Let's see how they react to a show of force. The order crackled through Chen's headset, and he acknowledged with professional calm despite the unease growing in his chest. He banked his F-35 toward the nearest formation of lights, closing to within 500 meters before pulling alongside. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The objects weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were more like crystalline sculptures of light and energy, their surfaces rippling with colors that had no names in human language. Inside each one, he could see shadowy forms that might have been occupants, but they moved with a fluid grace that suggested they were more energy than matter. The beings seemed to be engaged in some kind of ritual, their movements synchronized in patterns that spoke of deep spiritual significance. Tower, this is Phoenix Lead, Chen reported, his voice barely steady. I don't think these are military assets. They look more like a religious procession. I can see the occupants, and they don't appear to be armed or threatening. Anyway, General Hawthorne's expression didn't change. Captain, your assessment of their intentions is noted, but your mission parameters remain unchanged. Unknown contacts in American airspace will be treated as potential threats until they comply with standard identification procedures. General, with respect, I don't think they understand our procedures. They might not even perceive reality the same way we do. Then they'll learn, Hawthorne replied. Fire a warning shot. The order hit Chen like a physical blow. In all his years of service, he had never fired on a target that showed no hostile intent. But orders were orders, and the chain of command existed for reasons that went beyond individual conscience. Phoenix Flight, this is lead. We are authorized for a warning shot. Phoenix 3, you have the honor. Lieutenant Jake Morrison had been the youngest pilot to qualify for the Advanced Fighter program. His reflexes sharp and his dedication absolute. But as he armed his weapon systems and selected a target area, well clear of the mysterious formations, something deep in his gut told him this was wrong. Phoenix Lead, requesting confirmation on the warning shot. These contacts are showing no aggressive behavior. Confirmed. Phoenix 3, fire for effect. The 20mm cannon roared to life, sending a stream of tracer rounds across the morning sky in a brilliant display of human firepower. The rounds passed harmlessly through empty air, but their message was unmistakable: comply or face the consequences. The reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Luminara felt the violent intent behind the weapon's fire like a knife through her consciousness. The sheer malevolent energy of the axe sending shockwaves through the entire pilgrimage fleet. For the first time in 7,000 years of peaceful journeys, the ethereal collective was being threatened with violence during their most sacred ritual. The response rippled through the formations like wind through wheat. The pilgrimage vessels began to shift their patterns, not in retreat, but in a protective formation that had not been used since the ancient wars of their distant past. Colors flowed across their surfaces in hues that spoke of deep sorrow and confusion. Why were these young beings responding to mystery with aggression? What had the collective done to provoke such hostility? Dear Universe, Luminara whispered, in the harmonic frequencies of her people, we seek only wisdom and peace. Why do they bring us violence? The answer came not in words, but in the sudden understanding that flooded her consciousness. As she touched the minds of the human pilots, fear. These beings were acting from pure, primal fear of the unknown. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that anything different was potentially dangerous, that the proper response to mystery was control or destruction. But there was something else in the human consciousness that gave her hope. Beneath the layers of military training and cultural conditioning, she sensed doubt. The pilots knew, on some level, that what they were doing was wrong. Their natural empathy was fighting against their orders, their innate wisdom struggling against their learned responses. In his F-35, Captain Chen watched in amazement as the formations above him began to change. The lights grew brighter, their movements more complex, and suddenly he could hear something impossible: music. It was coming through his radio, but it wasn't coming from any human source. The harmonies were beyond anything earthly instruments could produce, a symphony of pure emotion that spoke directly to the soul. Tower, are you monitoring this transmission? He called out, his voice filled with wonder. We're picking up the audio, Phoenix Lead. It appears to be some kind of communication attempt. It's not communication, Chen replied, understanding flooding through him. It's prayer. They're praying. The realization hit the control tower like a thunderbolt. Rodriguez looked up from her console, tears streaming down her face as the alien music washed over the radio systems. General, I don't think they're invaders. I think they're pilgrims. General Hawthorne stood rigid, her military training warring with the growing evidence that they had seriously misinterpreted the situation. But admitting error at this point could have catastrophic consequences. The entire world was watching. Every allied nation had aircraft in the sky, and the slightest sign of weakness could trigger an international incident. Maintain position, she ordered. Continue attempts at communication. But communication was already happening, just not in any way the humans had expected. Luminara was reaching out, with all her consciousness, trying to bridge the vast gap between species and understanding. She touched the mind of the young radar operator first, finding there a heart more open to mystery and wonder. Rodriguez gasped as alien thoughts brushed against her consciousness. Suddenly she could see the pilgrimage as Luminara saw it, a sacred journey undertaken by beings so ancient and wise that their entire civilization was built on the pursuit of cosmic understanding. She saw the careful planning that had gone into this moment, the generations of preparation, the deep spiritual significance of what was happening above them. General, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. They're not invaders. They're not even really here for us. This is their holy day. We're interrupting their church service. That's impossible, Hawthorne replied. But her voice lacked conviction. Is it? General, what if we're wrong? What if we're about to start a war with beings who never meant us any harm? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about the universe. Around the world, similar conversations were taking place in command centers and cockpits, as the growing realization dawned that humanity might have encountered something beyond their comprehension or control. Above them, the pilgrimage continued, but now it carried a note of mourning. The sacred harmonies were interrupted by dissonant chords that spoke of innocence lost and peace shattered. The ethereal collective had faced many challenges in their cosmic journey, but never before had they encountered beings so young and afraid that they responded to mystery with violence. Luminara made a decision that would echo through the collective consciousness of her people for generations to come. Instead of retreating or defending, she chose to teach. With careful precision, she began to project images directly into the minds of the humans below, sharing the story of the pilgrimage and the deep spiritual truths that drove her people across the galaxies. Captain Chen nearly lost control of his aircraft as his mind was suddenly filled with visions of cosmic beauty beyond description. He saw the birth of stars and the dance of galaxies, felt the deep currents of universal energy that connected all living things. For a brief, shining moment, he understood what it meant to be truly alive in an infinite universe. Phoenix lead. To Tower, he called out, his voice shaking with emotion, "We need to stand down. We need to stand down right now. These aren't enemies. They're teachers." But even as understanding dawned on individual humans, the larger machinery of military response continued to turn. Other nations were mobilizing, other aircraft were taking to the skies, and the potential for catastrophic misunderstanding was growing by the minute. In the Beijing Military Command Center, General Wei Jiao was receiving similar reports from his pilots. The mysterious formations had appeared over Chinese airspace as well, maintaining the same peaceful but incomprehensible behavior. Unlike his American counterparts, General Wei had spent years studying ancient Chinese philosophy, and something about the situation reminded him of old stories about celestial visitations. Do not engage. He ordered his pilots, maintain observation distance and attempt to understand their purpose. It was a decision that would save millions of lives. In Moscow, Colonel Dmitry Volkov was taking a more aggressive stance. Russian doctrine had always favored decisive action over prolonged uncertainty, and the appearance of unidentified aircraft over Russian territory was considered an automatic act of war. Weapons free, he commanded his MiG-31 interceptors. If they will not identify themselves, then they are hostile by definition. The first missile launched at 04:03 hours Moscow time. It was a state-of-the-art air-to-air weapon capable of destroying any known aircraft, fired by a pilot who had never missed a target in 15 years of service. The missile's guidance system locked onto the largest formation of pilgrimage vessels, its warhead armed and ready to detonate. But as it approached its target, something extraordinary happened. The pilgrimage vessel didn't attempt to evade or defend itself. Instead, it simply forgave. The alien consciousness reached out to the incoming weapon with such overwhelming compassion that the missile's guidance system simply shut down. Unable to process the complete absence of hostile intent in its target, the weapon passed harmlessly through the formation and detonated in empty sky. Its explosion like a tiny star against the morning horizon. Luminara felt the missile's approach, and its subsequent failure as a physical pain in her consciousness. The sheer malevolence of the attack, the casual willingness to destroy what these humans didn't understand, nearly shattered her faith in the possibility of peaceful contact. But she also felt something else, the doubt and horror in the mind of the pilot who had fired the shot. Major Alexei Petrov had been flying military aircraft for 20 years, but he had never fired on a target that didn't fire back. As his missile passed harmlessly through the alien formation, he realized that he had just attempted to murder beings who posed no threat to anyone. The shame of it burned in his chest like acid. "Command, this is Wolf Leader," he reported, his voice hollow. "Missile failed to detonate on target. But Command, I don't think they're hostile. I think they're trying to communicate. Wolf Leader, maintain attack posture. Prepare for second missile launch. Negative, Command. I will not fire on peaceful contacts." It was an act of insubordination that would end his military career. But Petrov couldn't bring himself to care. Some things were more important than following orders, and protecting innocent life was one of them. The news of the failed missile attack spread through military channels around the world. Within minutes, the implications were staggering. Either the aliens possessed defensive technology beyond human comprehension, or they had found a way to neutralize human weapons through means that defied all known physics. In the Mojave Control Tower, General Hawthorne was facing the collapse of everything she thought she understood about warfare and national security. Her pilots were refusing orders, her weapons were ineffective, and the aliens continued their incomprehensible ritual as if nothing had happened. "General, Rodriguez said quietly, I'm receiving communications from allied commands around the world. The Chinese are standing down. The Europeans are maintaining defensive positions only. We're the only ones still maintaining an aggressive posture. Because we're the only ones taking this threat seriously, Hawthorne replied. But even, she could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. General, what if they're right? What if there is no threat? It was the question that Hawthorne had been avoiding. The possibility that her entire response had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. In her 40 years of military service, she had never encountered a scenario where the appropriate response was to do nothing. But as she watched the serene formations above them, she began to wonder if doing nothing might be exactly what the situation required. Above them, Luminara was reaching a decision of her own. The pilgrimage could continue despite the human interference, but the spiritual harmony that was the ritual's core purpose had been irreparably damaged. The violence and fear radiating from the planet below was like poison in the cosmic music, turning what should have been a celebration of universal peace into a reminder of how far some species still had to evolve. But perhaps, she thought, that was the lesson the universe intended to teach. Perhaps the purpose of this pilgrimage was not just to seek wisdom, but to share it with beings who desperately needed guidance. With careful precision, she began to lower her vessel toward the human aircraft, her consciousness reaching out to touch the mind of the pilot who had shown the most openness to understanding. Captain Chen felt her approach like the warmth of sunlight on his face, a presence both alien and familiar that spoke to something deep in his soul. Tower. This is Phoenix Lead, Chen reported, his voice filled with wonder. One of the contacts is descending toward my position, but I don't feel any threat. It's more like being welcomed home. The pilgrimage vessel came to rest just meters from Chen's F-35, its crystalline surface rippling with colors that had no names in human language. Through its translucent walls, Chen could see the being inside, a form of pure consciousness that radiated peace and ancient wisdom. And then, impossibly, he heard her voice in his mind, speaking in perfect English despite the fact that she had never encountered the language before. Welcome, young warrior, Luminara said, her mental voice carrying harmonics of compassion that brought tears to Chen's eyes. We mean you no harm. We seek only wisdom and understanding. Will you help us bridge the gap between our peoples? Chen's response came not in words, but in the sudden opening of his heart and mind to possibilities he had never imagined. In that moment of perfect communication, he understood the true purpose of the pilgrimage and the cosmic tragedy of humanity's violent response to mystery. Yes, he whispered, not caring that his radio was open and every word was being heard by military commanders around the world. Yes, I'll help. The conversation that followed would be studied by philosophers and theologians for generations to come. Through Chen's willing mind, Luminara shared the story of her people, their ancient civilization built on the pursuit of wisdom, their sacred journeys across the galaxies, their deep respect for all forms of consciousness. She showed him images of worlds where different species lived in harmony, where conflict was resolved through understanding rather than violence, where the pursuit of knowledge was considered the highest calling. In return, Chen shared the story of humanity, their struggles and triumphs, their dreams and fears, their gradual evolution from tribal warfare to global cooperation. He showed her the beauty of human art and music, the passion of human love, the fierce determination that had carried his species from caves to the stars. You are young, Luminara acknowledged, but you have such potential. Your species burns with an intensity that could illuminate the universe. If only you could learn to channel it toward creation rather than destruction. How? Chen asked. How do we learn to see mystery as opportunity instead of threat? The same way we did countless ages ago. One mind at a time. One heart at a time. One choice at a time. The exchange was being monitored by every major military installation on Earth, translated by computers and analyzed by the best minds humanity had to offer. But the true meaning could only be understood by those willing to open their hearts to possibilities beyond their current comprehension. In the control tower, Rodriguez was crying openly as she listened to the conversation. General, she whispered, they're not trying to conquer us. They're trying to save us. General Hawthorne stood in silence, her worldview crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. Everything she had been trained to believe about national security and military necessity was being challenged by the simple presence of beings who had mastered the art of living without violence. Stand down all aircraft, she ordered quietly. Maintain observation distance only. No aggressive actions without my direct authorization. The order rippled through military commands around the world as other nations followed America's lead. For the first time since the pilgrimage had begun, the skies fell quiet except for the alien harmonies that continued to pour from the mysterious vessels. But the damage had already been done. The sacred ritual that the ethereal collective had been preparing for centuries had been interrupted by violence and fear. The cosmic harmonies that should have reached their crescendo at precisely the right moment had been thrown into discord by human interference. Luminara felt the weight of this failure like a physical pain in her consciousness. 7,000 years of tradition, broken by beings too young to understand what they were destroying. But as she touched the minds of humans like Chen and Rodriguez, she began to see another possibility. Perhaps, she said to the collective consciousness of her people, this is not a failure, but an opportunity. Perhaps the universe brought us here not just to seek wisdom, but to plant seeds of it in fertile ground. The response from her fellow pilgrims was immediate and profound. Instead of retreat or despair, they chose transformation. The pilgrimage ritual began to change, adapting to include the chaotic energy of human consciousness. The harmonies shifted to incorporate the discordant notes of fear and violence, transforming them into something beautiful and new. What emerged was a cosmic symphony unlike anything the ethereal collective had ever created. It was a song of two species meeting across the void, of misunderstanding giving way to wonder, of the possibility that even the youngest and most violent civilizations could learn to reach for something higher. The music filled the airwaves of Earth, broadcast on every frequency and heard by every human being with access to a radio or television. It spoke directly to the soul, bypassing language and culture to touch the universal human longing for meaning and connection. In cities around the world, people stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. The pilgrimage vessels were visible now to the naked eye, their crystalline forms catching the sunlight and scattering it in rainbow patterns across the heavens. But more than their visual beauty, it was their spiritual presence that captured human attention. For the first time in recorded history, the entire human species was united in a single moment of wonder and possibility. In the Mojave Desert, Captain Chen had landed his F-35 and was standing in the sand, looking up at Luminara's vessel as it hovered just above him. The barrier between species had dissolved completely now, and they were communicating mind to mind, heart to heart, soul to soul. Your people fear us because you see us as conquerors, Luminara explained. But we have no interest in your world, except as a waypoint in our journey. What we offer is not domination, but invitation. The universe is vast and full of wonders beyond imagination. Would you like to see? The vision that followed shattered every assumption Chen had ever held about reality. He saw civilizations that spanned galaxies, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical existence. Worlds where different species worked together to unlock the deepest mysteries of creation. He saw the true scale of the universe and humanity's place within it, not as conquerors or victims, but as children taking their first steps into an infinite playground of possibility. We could be part of this, he asked, his voice filled with awe. You already are, Luminara replied. You have always been part of it. The only question is whether you choose to grow into your potential, or remain trapped in the narrow boundaries of fear and violence. The conversation continued for hours, witnessed by billions of humans and recorded for posterity. It covered topics that human philosophers had debated for centuries: the nature of consciousness, the purpose of existence, the possibility of life beyond death. But more than intellectual exchange, it was a profound emotional connection between two very different forms of life, united by their shared desire to understand the universe and their place within it. As the sun began to set over the Mojave Desert, the pilgrimage vessels began their departure. The ritual was complete, transformed by the unexpected encounter with humanity into something new and unprecedented. They had gained wisdom not from cosmic meditation, but from contact with beings whose passion and intensity had shown them new possibilities for growth and understanding. Will we see you again? Chen asked as Luminara's vessel began to rise. Time is different for us than for you, she replied. But the connection we have forged will never be broken. Whenever your species reaches out to the stars with wonder rather than weapons, we will be there to guide you. The pilgrimage fleet gathered in formation high above the earth, their crystalline forms catching the last rays of sunlight and reflecting them back as a shower of golden light. The harmonies they sang were different now, incorporating the chaotic beauty of human emotion into their cosmic symphony. And then they were gone, fading from visibility as they ascended beyond the reach of human technology. But they left behind something precious, the knowledge that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that the cosmos was full of beings willing to help them grow into their potential. In the months that followed, the effects of the encounter rippled through human civilization like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Military budgets were redirected toward space exploration and scientific research. International conflicts that had seemed intractable suddenly found peaceful solutions, as humans began to see themselves as part of a larger cosmic community. Captain Chen left the military and became one of the world's leading advocates for peaceful space exploration. His first-hand account of the encounter with Luminara became the foundation for a new understanding of humanity's place in the universe. General Hawthorne also left military service, but for different reasons. The encounter had shattered her faith in the necessity of violence, leaving her unable to continue in a role that required her to prepare for war. She became a teacher instead, working to educate the next generation about the importance of approaching the unknown with curiosity rather than fear. Rodriguez continued her work as a radar technician, but now she spent her time monitoring the skies not for threats, but for signs of returning visitors. She never detected another pilgrimage fleet, but she never stopped hoping. The recording of the alien harmonies became the most played piece of music in human history, its complex rhythms and otherworldly melodies inspiring a new generation of composers and musicians. Scientists spent decades trying to understand the mathematical principles underlying the alien songs, discovering new forms of physics and cosmology in the process. But perhaps the most important legacy of the encounter was the simple realization that the universe was not a hostile place to be conquered, but a vast community to be joined. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence had almost ended in tragedy, but it had ultimately become a source of hope and inspiration that would guide the species for generations to come. Somewhere in the space between galaxies, the ethereal collective continued their eternal pilgrimage, carrying within the memory of a young species that had taught them the value of passionate intensity and the possibility of growth through conflict. They sang new songs now, harmonies that incorporated the chaotic beauty of human emotion into their cosmic symphony. And in the space between the notes, in the silence that connected all sounds, there was the promise of future meetings, future opportunities for growth and understanding between species separated by biology, but united by their shared wonder at the infinite mystery of existence. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of teachers willing to help those brave enough to approach mystery with open hearts and minds. Humanity had learned this lesson the hard way, but they had learned it nonetheless. And in learning it, they had taken their first step toward joining the cosmic community that awaited them among the stars.